see David Osborne here. Is he still here?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Weinberg, and I am a Senior Research Fellow at the New America Foundation. I work primarily on issues of health policy. Today, I will be moderating a panel on building for the future. The only way that we're going to get out of a lot of these fiscal challenges that face the states is growing our economy. And how do we grow our economy? We invest in our economy. We invest in business, we invest in education, we invest in infrastructure. But unfortunately, a lot of the conversations that we're having right now, both at the federal level as regards the stimulus package, and at the state level as regards our budget crisis, we are removing the investments that we make as a public that will allow us to grow in the future. We're removing investments in green energy, we're removing investments in health IT, we're removing investments in education. And that's something that I think we need to be very careful about as we think about a long-term strategy for moving out of this fiscal crisis. But to make the case for investments, we need to show that they're an efficient and wise use of public resources. So we're going to be talking on this panel about what are the best investments that we can make as states to get out of this fiscal crisis. And we are extremely fortunate to have with us public leaders with a broad range of experience in a number of different areas. Their bios are in your packets. Lisa Margonelli is an Irvine Fellow at the New America Foundation, who focuses her work on energy issues. Carol Galante is the President and CEO of the Bridge Housing Corporation. Stephen Levy is the Director and Senior Economist at the Center for the Continuing Study of the California Economy. But we'll start our conversation with Gary Locke, who is the two-term governor of Washington State. When Mark Paul asked David Osborne who he should have speak at this conference, David said, "You need to get Gary Locke down here." Because really what California needs to do is what Washington did during Gary Locke's 2 terms of office. So we're going to start our conversation out today with Gary telling us a little bit about what he did and giving us his vision for the future for California, what we do during this crisis, and how it may impact our understanding of the social contract. Governor Locke.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's really a pleasure to be down here, and I didn't know it was that I have David Osborne to blame for my appearance down here. But I'm a great disciple of David Osborne, along with Peter Hutchinson. Obviously, the finances of California, the fiscal policies, the mandates, the whole system of government in Washington State is totally different from here in California. But clearly there are some things that I think all the states should look at as they look at the ups and downs of revenues and spending and costs. Clearly the federal government is a major player with all the entitlements that all the states are saddled with. But it's how we respond to that. And in Washington State, I have to first give you a little bit of a primer so you understand the differences between Washington. And I don't profess to understand all the things that are here in California, so I'm not going to try and compare. But I'll just tell you what the circumstances are in the state of Washington and therefore how we were able to deal with it. In the state of Washington, the state is the primary funder of kindergarten through 12th grade education. In the early 70s, we had a major lawsuit against the state that said that reliance on local property taxes, district by district, really led to uneven funding for education in the poor rural areas versus the large urban areas. And after several defeats of local levies in some of these large metropolitan areas, those districts, the teachers union, the parents, and the districts filed a lawsuit against the state saying that the state's paramount duty, as indicated in our state constitution, is kindergarten through 12th grade education, and reliance on local property taxes led to uneven education and therefore abdication of that responsibility. So the state provides roughly 80% of all the funding for every single school district. The school districts are allowed to supplement to a slight degree through local levies. And those districts that aren't able to raise very much, the state will also contribute to say that a poor rural area, agricultural area, obviously can't assess, doesn't have skyscrapers and huge corporate offices to assess a property tax on, and therefore they can't raise much money. And then, of course, the districts get some money from the federal government. So roughly 46% of the general budget of the state of Washington, forget the construction budget, the highway budgets and things like that, but about 46% of our general budget, discretionary budget, general fund budget, current expense budget, goes for kindergarten through 12th grade education. 46%. And that's virtually untouchable. We really can't cut that. Sued immediately. Then you have human services that every state has, from welfare, nursing homes, then you got the prisons, and then you got higher ed, and then you've got mandatory obligations like pensions, interest payments on borrowing, and so forth. And in the state of Washington, we have a limit on how much we can borrow at any one time by way of bonds, whether it's for construction of university campuses and school construction, et cetera, et cetera. We have a limit. And so when we're in a downtime, it's very hard to make ends meet. We either raise taxes or we have to cut discretionary spending, and most of that discretionary spending from the previous panel we heard on higher education means it's on higher ed. And so we have some things different than California and some of the other states. We do not give the institution's tuition setting authority. The tuition setting authority is set by the state, so it's pretty consistent across all the colleges and universities. When we have given them additional tuition setting authority or allowed them to go a little bit higher, we have always, and any time the state has raised tuition, we put a lot of money by formula into a financial aid pot for grants and loans for students, in addition to whatever they might receive by Pell Grants. And these scholarships and financial aid are available for students to go to both public and private schools. Shortly after September 11th, like all the states, we went into a major financial crisis, just as all the states are in now. We decided that we would not raise taxes and that we would engage in what we call priorities of government. And we had both the public and the private sector and agency heads and employees and members of the public going through every single function of state government and prioritizing everything. We in the government, in the governor's office, with a team of advisors, kind of set broad parameters of how much we thought we wanted to spend in major categories: economic development, public safety, education, human services. And it was really great to see that and we had people from totally different areas looking at each of these major functions. And in the end, some of them, they would rank all the functions, and given the dollar amounts that they were given, or that they had to work with, they would then say, well, obviously these programs would fall off the table and could not be funded. Many groups said, in the economic development group, for instance, we need to put more money into the education group. And we want to take some money from the economic development group and put into the education group. So it was really great collaboration. But we went through each of those things. And the point is that this priorities of government approach is not just when you're in tough fiscal times. You can also use it when you have lots of money. The problem with government is that sometimes we just don't set priorities. And we continue to do things that are haphazard, mediocre, or completely ineffective without ever judging them. This is not zero-based budgeting. It's kind of akin to it. We're not going to say, do we have a University of Washington? You're not going to say, are you going to have a UC Berkeley? And you're not going to say, are we going to close down all of our prison systems altogether? But if you had a certain amount of money allocated to the prison system, and you want to continue to incarcerate so many people, or monitor people, how can you be more efficient in those tasks? And if you're given set dollars, then agencies and the public will really engage in a process of re-examining everything that they're doing, to deciding whether this program is completely ineffective and should be terminated, to whether or not we can get greater efficiencies from the entire system, and the list goes on and on. I've long believed that we should be establishing priorities, because government will never have enough money to do it all. No matter how good the economy, no matter what the source of income, we will never have enough money to satisfy everyone's wish list. Isn't it better that we try to do a few things truly well than to do so many things in a haphazard or mediocre fashion? And that's the beauty of priorities of government. We were able to, in fact, with a almost a 15% reduction in our revenues compared to where we wanted to be, what we would have had to spend without changing any of the laws, with more people coming in the prison systems, more kids signing up in the public schools, and historical increase in enrollments in our colleges and universities, more people in nursing homes, et cetera, et cetera. How much would the state would have had to spend? And we also had initiatives that mandated cost of living increases and teacher salary increases, et cetera, et cetera. Given those projected costs, we were short about 15%. We were able to bridge that gap without raising taxes by the priorities of government approach. And in that, we were still able to expand funding for education, more enrollments, more money for the state financial aid system, and continue with our commitment on kindergarten through 12th grade education enhancements, as well as keeping the funding for reduced class sizes. So we were able to do all of that. But part of the key also was government efficiency. And that's where people like David Osborne and others have really charged us. We've always had, from day one, an emphasis on quality and process improvement. Inviting people from the private sector to help out in government, challenging the employees to really set high, lofty goals, unattainable goals. And the motto is that better to stretch high so that if you don't make it, you still have exceeded your expectations instead of setting a very low goal of improvement. Here's one example. When I took office, the waiting time to renew your driver's license in the various state driver's license agencies was about an hour. So I called in the senior management team of the Department of Licensing, learned about all their different initiatives, and I said, you know, you are the face of government, and you're an example of people's frustrations with government, an hour waiting time to renew your driver's license. We need to really improve. So I challenge you, let's improve. Now, what do you think is substantial improvement? And the management team in the governor's office, or the management team of the Department of Licensing gathered in the governor's office, hemmed and hawed, and they finally said, 20% improvement. I said, oh, 20% improvement, that's not bad, 20%. Then I got to thinking, 20% of 60 minutes is what? 12 minutes. So I'd still be waiting 48 minutes in line to renew my driver's license. And I said, you know, that's a great idea. Tell you what, how about a 12-minute maximum waiting time, all right? An 80% improvement. Now, that's a real stretch goal. And it forced them to completely revamp their processes and procedures instead of just tinkering around the edges and doing things on the margin. And when they first tried it, they didn't get 12 minutes. They were like 20 minutes. But when you have a really high stretch goal, even if you fail at that impossible goal, you will have had dramatic improvement. And if you really have a really high goal, you really force them to think completely out of the box. As I left office, I had to go in and renew my driver's license, and you know, pull down one of those little tabs. And sometimes, you know, you go into these private agencies and they have a little tab for customer service, and you call their number, and it printed out the time on the bottom. And then I just sat in the back of the room, and I was in jeans and everything. Nobody recognized me, and they called my name up or my number up, or marked it down on the sheet of paper. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. But we didn't stop there, because even before I left office, I said, why should we even stand in line? We now, in the state of Washington, can renew your driver's license over the internet. You can do it at 2 o'clock in the morning. You can revamp or renew your license tabs or your car tabs over the internet as well. So many functions are all done over the internet. You can reserve a campsite at your favorite state park at 2 o'clock in the morning from your home computer while you're waiting for your son or daughter to come home from their date at the library. Right? Things that used to take us on personnel systems 90 days to process an exam for a person who wanted to apply for a job with state government, it's now done in 15 minutes and sent off to the agency with the results. We also wanted to motivate employees to save, and we came up with a savings incentive plan. For every dollar that an agency saves from efficiencies while still accomplishing their goal or their objective, they get to keep 50 cents to be spent in an orderly fashion the following budget year. No longer that mad rush to spend all the unused dollars in the last 2-3 months of the fiscal year on unnecessary things. They get to keep 50 cents to be spent in an orderly fashion on customer service, on training of employees, or on technology to upgrade their functions. The other 50 cents goes into a pot of money that all state employees care about. That pot of money is for renovation of school buildings in our public schools, renovation or new construction. In our first few years, and 100% of money that's not used because people don't show up for the services, 100% of that money that's saved goes into that pot. Just from the efficiency side alone, in the first couple of years, we saved over $100 million that went into school construction. So you have to have those incentives for saving. One thing that we have in the state of Washington that I think other states need to look at is independent forecasting, so that the legislatures know exactly how much money they have. Many years ago in the state of Washington, we had a governor, and we were going through a big economic downturn in the early 80s. The revenue director would say, it's not that bad, we only have to have a special session, we're going to only raise taxes a little bit because we think the economy is going to improve this much. Next quarter, the revenues did not come in, another special session, they raised taxes some more, and they cut some more programs, and they said, but that's the end of it because we really think the economy is going to be here in 3 more months. Did not happen. Another special session, raised taxes, cut more programs, and it went on and on and on. The legislature finally, the next time around, came in and passed a law that says, we don't trust your figures anymore. You're politicizing things. So they set up an independent forecasting council where it takes both Democrats and Republicans and the administration to fire the person. So the governor's office can't fire it. The legislature can't fire it. There are like one from the House, one Democrat from the House, one Republican from the House, one Democrat from the Senate, one Republican from the Senate, and the governor's office. That's 5. It takes 4 to fire the person. And that person gives a forecast of the revenues to the state. The legislature and the governor have to use his figures whether we agree with it or not. If we think he's too cautious, it doesn't matter. We cannot have a budget that exceeds the revenues that he has predicted. And he will update it every quarter. We have to use his figures. And then we gradually gave him more responsibilities. He was now responsible for estimating the number of people in our prison systems, which drives up costs, which affects costs, number of kids coming into the schools, which affects costs, number of people on welfare, which affects our spending. We have to use his figures whether we like it or not. And that has given a lot more predictability and taken the politics out of the revenue side of government. Because if we fudge the figures and say we've got a lot of money coming in, we can make everybody happy, we don't have to make the tough decisions, and then the next quarter, the next session, reality hits. So that's, I think, a very, very important thing that has really helped us in our state. We've also adopted a constitutional measure of a rainy day account, where 1% of our revenues every single year have to go into a constitutionally protected rainy day account that the legislature cannot touch. They can only touch it with a super majority vote of the legislature. Kind of take the ups and downs of revenues and to avoid the boom and bust cycles of budgeting. And only if job growth is less than a certain amount, less than 1%, and in this recession, clearly it will be less than 1%, then the legislature without a majority vote can tap into it. We just started this a couple years ago. It has not been built up to the level that we would like, but these are just some of the safeguards that I think that people have to have. Let me just say that building for the future, education has to be the key. Education has to be the key, both investment in higher ed and in K through 12. And commenting on the previous panel, there has to be greater efficiencies in the colleges and universities. There has to be more coordination with the K through 12 system, kindergarten through 12th grade system, with respect to education. Whether it's guaranteed tuition, kind of saying that tuition over the life of your sons or daughters' tenure in college over the next 4 or 5 years will not go up by more than 5 or 6%. You know, predictability in the rates. The same way that the cable companies and various broadband providers, you know, almost lure you and say that if you stick with us, you know, you're going to have these types of services and your rates will not go up by a certain amount. And if you give more tuition-setting authority to the colleges and universities, as we have sometimes talked about with our colleges and universities, they then have to go out and raise funds, additional funds, to make sure that nobody is turned away and that there's not a greater burden on those particular students, so that those colleges and universities have to enhance what the state provides by way of financial aid. But this downturn cannot be used as an excuse to cutting back on education, because that will just move our country even farther back once we are out of this. So many other countries are educating their students, whether they're sending them to the United States or they're sending them to their own colleges, universities, and those students are going to be competing against our children for these jobs of the future in this 21st century global high-tech economy. We are hurting ourselves and shooting ourselves in the foot if we cut back on education, especially higher ed. Higher ed cannot be the budget balancer in these tough economic times, especially in the state of Washington, where K through 12 is constitutionally protected. One thing that we can do is greater efficiency. And that can mean, for instance, offering more courses over the internet with college credit, offering those calculus, chemistry, statistics courses, advanced placement courses to students in the rural districts, in the high schools, so that they can start taking those courses with credit, so that when they do go to college, they're prepared, they don't have to spend as much time, they can graduate faster through the higher ed system. Higher ed can be a lot more efficient in terms of marketing to the hunger and meeting the hunger that is out there among the general population. So many people in these tough economic times want to go back to school for job training and retraining, but tuition's a problem, especially if they're working, especially if they've been laid off. Why can't we offer more courses over the internet? Compete with places like Phoenix University. They're making a gold mine. Why can't our 4-year and our 2-year colleges compete against that and offer low-cost tuition using courses over the internet? In fact, there's no reason why in the United States a person should not be able to sit in on a course or a great lecture at Berkeley or USC or MIT or Harvard. In fact, MIT is already now offering all of their courses online. You can take and see the syllabus, the work that every student is taking at MIT. You may not get college credit for it, but at least you can learn and improve your mind. Why not do that with our state colleges, universities, with credit, with a fee? And so there are great opportunities that we have throughout the United States and in the states to focus on that commitment on education without hurting them and without hurting our prospects for the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Governor Locke. The work you did on setting the priorities for government is extraordinarily difficult work. As we all know, from each panel we hear, healthcare is such an enormously huge problem, we can't do anything else, but we can't cut education. And so the work that you managed to do to find efficiencies and really get Washington's priorities in order is nothing short of inspirational. Let's hear about another priority, which is a very basic priority, which is to say housing. So Carol Galante, would you like to share some remarks in that regard?
Sure. I think that maybe part of the theme here is if we're going to invest, we have to look at investing in a variety of public policy measures, whether it's education or in the case of the work that we do in housing. So think about this as housing as infrastructure and how you best invest in this very important goal of providing quality shelter for the workforce. And I want to keep on the theme of efficiency here for a minute, and my fellow panelists have been wondering why I'm carrying around a little piece of paper from one of those paper calendars that's dated Wednesday, April 30th, 2008. And I will tell you that somebody gave me one of these little paper calendars, how to live an eco-friendly life or something like that, for Christmas in December 2007. And of course I have my Outlook calendar on my Trio, so I don't use paper calendars, which I think is a lot more environmentally friendly than the paper calendar I was given. But I use the paper calendar just as a notepad. So I happened to be, using it as a notepad last night, and I turned over to actually see the inscription for this particular date that was just randomly in front of me. And I think it really frames the rest of what I want to say today. So size matters is the tip of the day. In the last 65 years, the average size of American houses has increased by more than 1,200 square feet. That's increased in size by more than 1,200 square feet, while the average household has shrunk by a person. So the tip for the day is, when buying a house, look for a place that fits your needs. The difference in the resources expended to build, maintain, heat, and cool it can be substantial. So I thought that was a good framing for what I wanted to speak about today, and that is that Bridge has really been at the forefront of building what is fashionably now called transit-oriented development or infill development. We're a nonprofit corporation. We focus on building homes and apartments for those at the lower end of the wage earning scale, but we also are very concerned about anybody who can't afford a home or an apartment on the salary that they earn close in to where they work. And we have been very focused on providing the housing that we build in urban infill locations because it is ultimately the most efficient way to invest in new housing. And I was struck by one of the comments of the education speaker previously to this panel, talking about how the education system was really built for a post-World War II generation of, very, white, homogeneous middle class, and I pictured, of course, as he was talking about this in educational terms, the post-World War II development of residential development in this country, which is all single-family detached homes as far as the eye can see on virgin farmlands, spurred by major public investment in roads. I mean, that is, the automobile changed the entire growth pattern of this country and, demanded and developed land use patterns around the automobile. So we are trying to find ways to change that paradigm. And this is one of the cases where I believe, in a very small way, the state of California and the people of the state of California, in their wisdom, have a model of something that actually I would love to see taken to a broader scale in the country. And that is, in April of 2006, the people of California passed a variety of bond measures on infrastructure. One of them was called Proposition 1C. And I was very active in helping to get that bond measure on the ballot and get it passed. And what it did was provide $2.8 billion of general obligation bonds of the state of California to encourage and subsidize both affordable housing development. So it filled up some pots of affordable housing programs that exist in the state. And that was about $1 billion of the money. The other, almost $2 billion was for infrastructure around transit-oriented development and infill development. And there's a whole set of guidelines, but the idea is that we need public investment in these urban locations in order to get the housing to go there at more compact densities. So, for example, this money is going to build a garage at the MacArthur-Bart station in Oakland so that we can free up the land at the MacArthur-Bart station in Oakland to build, close to 1,000 new homes and apartments and retail, et cetera. So that's just one example of many, many developments that hopefully will happen as a part of the Proposition 1C funding. I would say good news, bad news on Proposition 1C is it is a general obligation bond. given our budget mess in California at the moment, the state cannot issue general obligation bonds, so they have allocated a bunch of this money to some incredibly exciting and worthy projects, but until the budget is fixed and until we get back to being able to issue state bonds, you know, these very worthy projects are held up. So not to be deterred, I just, you know, want to add that people who are concerned about trying to get this type of development happening are working on what we call a permanent source of funding for these kinds of activities that would come from some type of dedicated revenue, not going back to the ballot box and relying on issuing bonds every 10 years or so. But I do think the idea of breaking down the silos between public investment in infrastructure and public investment in housing is a good idea that could and should be adopted at the federal level. If you listen to Barney Frank, for example, the one major appropriation other than a stimulus bill that is out there on the horizon is appropriations for infrastructure, and there's a group of people in Washington who are working very hard to ensure that a piece of that goes to essentially modeled after the Prop 1C program, where you know, some of the transportation dollars, not HUD dollars, transportation dollars go to support the infrastructure necessary to get housing built in the places where we need it. So, you know, that's a main effort of ours, and I think a major place that we should be putting public investment. It ultimately is better for the environment. And you know, you said we need to grow the economy, and in order to grow the economy, we need to do more development. But we need to do it in the right places, or we're the planet's not going to survive. And so this is just a major emphasis, I think, for residential development in the future, is to create more transit-oriented urban infill development. One other thing I would say in terms of investment that's really needed to make that happen is, again, continuing on the theme of breaking down the silos of different kinds of government investment, because we are not going to get people to move back to urban areas or live in smaller, compact housing unless we provide the other kinds of goods and services that, you know, people want, that part of the reason they move to the suburbs for, and that is good schools. Urban schools absolutely have to be invested in at a level unprecedented in order to get this movement. You know, urban parks, things of that nature. You know, even way back in the old days when I first started in housing, there used to be a program at HUD called UDAG, Urban Development Action Grant. And the UDAG would give local governments money to do things like get a food store to come into a revitalizing community when that food store was not ready to pay market rents because they were nervous about whether they were going to make enough money there. This UDAG would literally subsidize getting businesses into the right location. And I think all of that's going to be necessary as part of this new urban movement, and we're going to require a variety of public investment to spear that private investment in these locations.
Great. Thank you so much. Stephen, if you would like to build on that.
I'd like to go back 60 years and forward maybe 10 or 15 years to continue the discussion we're having about public investment with a couple of twists. 60 years ago, for those who remember or read it in history, we came off an incredible, unifying, but very changeful experience of that Second World War. We entered an era which is remembered romantically as a 25-year period where standard of living doubled, easily, where a single breadwinner, most likely in the TV a man, could support a spouse and 2 children, was a bygone era that we look back at reverently. We invested. We had a GI Bill. We had a master plan for education in California. We built an interstate highway system. We built a massive road and water system throughout California. It was an investment era made easy by the doubling of living standards, and because it was before the time of Medicare and Medicaid and these large social programs that we treasure but cost a lot. There's one point that I think is important for looking ahead and building a future that we seem to forget. We had the only factories. Everybody else's factories had either been destroyed in the war, or there really was no South Korea, India, China industrial complex. And so we had a period that we long to go back for in a world where it ain't possible. And so one of the conversations we need about public investment in California, in the United States, is that the world has gotten to be a lot tougher place, and you can't gloss it over by saying we used to be number one, we're still number one in a couple of things. Maybe we are, or maybe we aren't, but there are countries out there who are achieving prosperity and broadening their middle class and putting children through school and higher education and investing and building like mad. Everywhere you go outside of this country, you see building. And so one of the conversations we have to have about whether we can get out of it purely with efficiency, and we should do everything we need to do on efficiency, particularly for state government, or whether the challenge we're facing is harder, and we may have to go back to a society that we had 60 years ago or 50 years ago, where we weren't consuming 70% of our output, but only 62% or 63%, and that other 7% went into investment. We have a hard choice in the discussion that I don't think we make progress on by papering it over. Now, everybody here has built an enormous case for investment. Governor Locke, Pat Callan, Carroll. You get to investment whether you think about how we're going to replace the 5 million baby boomers that are going to retire in California in the next 10 to 15 years, how we're going to replace them in those middle-level jobs. You get to it by looking at our crumbling infrastructure, by worrying about educating a generation of children who are arguably a little more difficult to educate than the generation back in the 50s and 60s. You worry about it if, in Carol's language, which I'll put now in my language, to be competitive in the state of California, we have to have a world-class workforce, a world-class infrastructure, and world-class communities that those workers and their families want to come to and find a house and find a place to send their kid to school. You get to it if you come to it from a position of social equity, because California, the changing demographics are known to you. We are going to be educating a largely generation of the children and grandchildren of immigrants, largely Latino and Asian, and while that doesn't mean it's a problem, there are more at-risk students. There are more people who are worried about housing. There are more people who are worried about whether there's a place for them in college, much less paying for it. So you get to investment a number of ways. I've said what I think one of the barriers is. We'd like to have it back like it was in the Ozzie and Harriet days. We'd like to have it back. We don't think of having India and China and Japan be poorer, but in a way it would be nicer if they didn't make cars and TVs and mobile phones and all of those things that we have to compete with. We don't have a choice. Second point, and I think it's the real social contract point that New America can be great at facilitating. We've got to struggle with our connections. You saw it a little bit in the very first panel where we're going to have a national debate about those promised benefits that we call Social Security and Medicare. I hate the word entitlement. Entitlement to me means my kid is entitled to a free public education. I don't think entitlement is bad. I think what we're struggling with are promised benefits that we're going to have trouble paying, and I think the respectful way to do that is to substitute some language. But in California, there are three connections that we've got to win with to get this public investment agenda or to get the efficiencies in state government. One, I've alluded to, we have a generational connection. Whether you look at that in Medicare or Social Security, or you look at it in the other way, in every bond election in California, at the city level, at the state level, we are asking a mostly older and affluent generation, because those are the people that vote in very high percentages, to invest in schools and roads for a group of people who will be here maybe after we die, who will inherit our jobs, because the baby boomer generation, that most educated generation, is retiring. So we have to both recognize that we're connected generationally. My friend Dal Meyer at USC says it in a rather in-the-face way. Who the bleep do you think is going to buy your house if we don't educate the next generation of students? But just go from the retirements. Our security at the national level, at the state level, our economy is in the hands of a generation that doesn't look like us, that we need to get into conversations because they often don't come into the room, but without whom we cannot have prosperity in this state. So my generation is connected to that generation. There's an ethnic connection that largely mirrors the generational connection and suggests conversations with broader audiences than this. The baby boom generation is largely Anglo, not entirely. The succeeding generation here, and maybe now in Washington, is largely Latino and Asian immigrant, or children of immigrants, or grandchildren of immigrants, and that's not bad. One of the things that gives us hope for is we have a lot of young people in California, but those connections are essential to sorting out a state budget and sorting out a public investment agenda that I think is going to be very difficult. And we are connected geographically in California, and we struggle with this. I am an Angelino transplanted to the Bay Area 45 years ago, and we fight over water. We fight over almost every issue at the state. But within regions, we're connected. I'll end with a little bit of hope. Okay? I went down a little bit. I don't think this is I think we got to dig deep. I went down before the November election and did some community organizing conversations in Los Angeles. And these are LA elections, sorry. In Los Angeles, people in the San Fernando Valley voted, along with people throughout that county, for a half-cent sales tax increase that was going to go mainly for projects that were nowhere near their home. They voted for other people's transportation projects because it is one region. More importantly, they voted for $3 million in community college bond funds, mostly supported by people who don't have children of school age, may have grandchildren of school age, but not going to be using the community colleges probably. So they voted for a group of people that lived in a different part of the region, that were probably of a different ethnic group, and they made that happen. And they voted for $7 billion for the LA City schools, which are 90% now Latino and Asian. That vote went from Beverly Hills and Santa Monica to the affected communities. And so at some level, we saw a set of connections where one group of people chose to make investments that would mainly go to another group of people. And I think that we need to be having those conversations respectfully with words like, how is our future connected? Because it really is. That's just a fact, whether we do it politically as a choice, but it's a fact that it is. And to go back to the final plug for New America, we have made, both in California's public employee retiree plans and in the nation's Medicare and Social Security systems, Medicare and Medicaid, a set of promises that people made life plans about, that they would have Medicare, that they would have Social Security, that they would have those pensions. They took those promises seriously. And we're now finding that we're connected in a way that those promises, the arithmetic doesn't work. And we have to have a respectful conversation with those people. We can't just say, we're going to take away your Medicare benefits at the same time we're asking you as the majority voters to pass all these bonds for our future. We are connected. And I think I'll leave it there and wait for Lisa to tell us how clean tech is going to save the day. I think clean tech is great.
Well, good luck, Lisa.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll talk from over here. Actually, I'm not here to talk about how clean tech can save the day. One of the things, and I may sound overly optimistic, one of the things I've spent some time thinking about recently is how we could use energy efficiency, which is sort of the poor cousin of clean tech, to stimulate the economy. And I think that there's a lot of potential there. The one reason that this presentation may seem optimistic is that almost anything that we do in terms of becoming more energy efficient is a good step, because the energy picture is just really kind of grim. So that means that there's lots of good news in this presentation. So let's see if I can get this to pay that off along with their housing debts and their other debts. And we know that it's played a big role in their in the kinds of choices that they had to make over the past couple of years. So anything that you can do with energy efficiency can also be used to help struggling families in this time. Energy efficiency does a lot of other things for the economy that are not up here, and I think when my PowerPoint skills get better, I'm going to turn this into kind of an animated, like ninja star or a power, you know, like some kind of Swiss Army knife or something like that. Because what energy efficiency also does is it takes money that would be going for repetitive buying of energy that just basically leaves the economy and puts it into sort of more capital investments. So you'd be investing, I mean, to use the overused example, a Prius, you invest in a Prius as opposed to investing in gasoline. So you're creating jobs at the same time. It has some other great things about it, but we'll go on to the next slide. In California, it's really been a social investment. Here's some facts about energy efficiency. You've already heard earlier this morning about California's energy efficiency progress and what it does. I think if you look down at the very last thing there, state energy efficiency programs, which are not noticeable to most of us. We just think that our refrigerators got bigger and cheaper. We don't think, oh, a campaign of refrigerator standards started in 1976 has led me to have this Energy Star refrigerator. No, but this actually saves us about $1,000 in energy costs per year. And if that arrived as a check from the government, we would be, you know, throwing ourselves at the feet of that politician. But we're not. The other thing about energy efficiency is that it allows moderate income families to kind of join into the green revolution. Our concept of what green is right now is really focused on buying things. It's focused on sticking a solar panel up on the roof, or on buying a Prius, or going to a green dry cleaner, or, you know, all this sort of stuff. And what that is, most of that is not accessible to moderate income families making $70,000 a year. And then what we've done to make it even worse, to make this sort of disparity and this feeling left out of the green revolution feeling worse, is that we have given subsidies of like $3,000 for a Prius, tax credits for that. We've given tax credits for solar panels. We have a $7,000 tax credit now on the books for plug-in hybrid vehicles. We really need to think about making green accessible, giving people who are not wealthy the means to behave in a green way and kind of profit from this green revolution. Okay, next slide. Okay, energy efficiency is largely a state deal. It's got a big national component, and but over the past 20 years or so, it's largely been a state deal. And you can see that we have really different residential state energy code sort of levels across the country. Montana, interestingly enough, is kind of leapfrogging up to the 2009 standards. And if we go on to the next slide, which is from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, did a scorecard in 2008 of energy efficiency programs, you can see that California, Oregon, and Washington are all among the top 10. I think they're in the top 6 of states with energy efficiency programs that involve a whole mixture of policies and standards and incentives and programs and awareness. So let's go on to the next slide. I'm doing this fast.
Thank you.
And what's happening, too, is among states is that they're becoming more aggressive about their energy efficiency programs because they see it as a way of kind of gaining some foothold over other states. And so Michigan has just announced this huge, whopping goal of cutting their fossil fuels for electricity 45% by 2020 through energy efficiency and renewables. They see it largely, and if you can imagine, this is Michigan, this is where Detroit is. This is a state that has suddenly woken up and said, oh my God, we need some jobs, and we need to be sure that they're the new jobs, not the old ones. If I would be very delighted if energy efficiency became the equivalent of what states do now with industrial parks and preferential tax treatment to draw big box stores. I don't believe it's going to happen, but that would be something that we could shoot for. Next slide. One of the things that we need to think about for energy efficiency is shifting the paradigm of what is public infrastructure and what is private infrastructure. The picture on the left is a post office, a New Deal WPA post office built in Philadelphia in 1935, I think. It's kind of wonderful. It was accessible by rail, water, plane, and car. And the other picture is obviously someone sticking a plug in the back of the computer. You know, what used to be public infrastructure through the information economy has really switched to something that happens in the privacy of your own home. The same thing has happened with energy. We just don't know it. We used to, for the WPA, we built things like the Hoover Dam to generate electricity. When the efficiency opportunities in a home allow us to cut the amount of energy that someone uses by 20% or even 40%, and then if you stick some solar panels or some microgeneration in the home, you can really continue to cut the amount of energy that the home draws. Where our public infrastructure, what's the difference between lowering consumption and increasing generation? That begins to blur, and it starts to seem like what we should be doing really is investing in homes to cut the amount of energy that we use and to increase the home's ability to generate energy depending upon the time of day. So there's a shifting paradigm of public versus private infrastructure. Next slide. Homes are a big opportunity, especially for low and moderate income people. The energy costs as energy costs rose over the past year, over the past 5 years, people described continuing to pay high energy costs and then switching their spending on basic necessities, on food, on medicine, and on education. So energy is one of these sort of cross-cutting things that affects everything that people do. Next slide. Weatherizing homes, and there's many, many opportunities to weatherize homes. The DOE estimates that among the poorest people, the poorest sort of group of income in the U.S., there's 15 million homes in need of weatherization. Weatherizing, the DOE also estimates that it creates 52 jobs for every million spent. It makes it easier for households to pay their mortgage or their rent. It makes them more comfortable. The stimulus fantastically provides $6.2 billion for weatherization, but it also provides a $15,000 tax credit for home buyers. I think that we could actually do a lot better, and this is where we sort of get into the Swiss Army knife of energy efficiency. Next slide. Instead of a $15,000 tax break, what we should do is we should give anybody who buys a new home a $15,000 loan to bring the home to the 2009 code standards for energy, and then basically make energy inspections as much a part of buying a new home as all the other inspections that go on. If we make those loans at 0 interest, we'll reduce interest on the entire mortgage. We'll make more people eligible to get those mortgages. We have a track record of that with Fannie Mae. Improved efficiency makes the mortgage payment, oof, something happened. It makes it easier for people to make those payments, and it makes them more likely to make their payments on their loans. The home investments create construction jobs. Now we could create incentives for people to get that work done within the next 2 years so that we actually have the jobs pouring into the economy right now. Giving people a $15,000 tax break is just one of these things that costs us $15,000, and what does it get us? I mean, anyone who's smart is going to put that money in the bank. They're not necessarily, or they're going to go and, you know, maybe spend it on a granite countertop or something if we're lucky, but they're not necessarily going to put it into increasing the value of our housing stock and lowering our CO2 emissions and lowering our energy use. I kind of did a little bit on what this would cost us. 67 of these loans, of these 0 interest loans, would get us $1 million of stimulus. So theoretically, the 52 jobs of weatherization. But it would only cost us about $30,000 for the loan costs are very, very low for government-issued loans. So that's one of the things that we could do. The next slide. Gasoline is another idea. Can you go back to gasoline? Okay. You're probably thinking, why does she want to talk about gasoline? It's $2.19 a gallon. I'm really happy. The reason is that there are opportunities in gasoline. Taxing gasoline is pretty much the third rail of American politics, but now I'm going to show you a gas tax scheme. Severin Borenstein is a professor at UC Berkeley. He's with the UC Energy Institute, and if you're at all interested in this, you need to go read his paper. It's easy to find on the internet. But basically, his idea is we cap the price of gas at $3 a gallon. We say it's going to be $3 a gallon in the future unless the price rises over $3 a gallon. And then the government gets some percentage of the difference between $3 a gallon and the actual market price. And if you go to the next slide, he has a number of different schemes for this, but I'm not going to get into them all. The potential revenue from this is incredibly high, and it could actually help the state in terms of dealing with some of the budget shortfall. Now, one question about this is, well, isn't that kind of regressive? Well, it certainly is. But gas prices are also very regressive, and they really hurt poor and moderate income families much more than other groups. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that people in the lower income categories actually pay a higher percentage of their income on gasoline, and that particularly rose through the last 3 years or so as gas prices really rose. The poor are also paying more for their cars. One of the things, or they have to buy more gas because through this sort of trick of the markets, they ended up getting the most gas-guzzling cars because if you're buying a used car right now, you can't get a Honda Civic for cheap. What you're going to get is an old SUV. So they're paying more for the energy in their vehicles. If you'll go to the next slide, there's also a great disparity in the commute. And this is from Next 10, this is a fantastic report. It's full of all kinds of amazing statistics that suggest all kinds of wacky policies. So, and if you go to the next slide, one of the things I think we need to do is take some of the money, put a $3 a gallon gas tax on, take some of that money to help people into cars that get 30 miles a gallon or more. The average household could save 353 gallons of gas a year if they're driving a car now that gets 20 miles per gallon. That's a lot of money. That's about $1,000 a year on gas alone. It's an awful lot of CO2. It's a lot of pollution. This sort of thing doesn't cost us that much because it's loans. They can be done through local credit unions. If we go on to the next line, there is both a local program for crusher credits, which is basically that we give people money for turning in an old gas guzzler or a heavily polluting vehicle. We could also give people very low interest loans, adapt the program to local needs, give certain vouchers to people who don't have enough money to start. The other thing is that it addresses disparities in lending and selling autos to the poor, which are really quite egregious, and we can talk about those afterwards. Next slide. Traffic is another opportunity. California wastes an awful lot of gas and time in traffic, and next slide, one of the things that we think about a lot is how can we improve mass transit. We also really need some kind of mid-transit or mini-transit. We need more van pools, more car pools. We need to really incentivize those and get both employers and residential areas in the act of doing carpools or doing van pools. Next slide. Okay. This is sort of the beginning of the whole green economy and saving us all. One of the things that we really need, and we have a big push for years, we've been planning in California to move to smart meters, which is that you have a meter on the side of your house that lets you know what the price of energy is, or price of electricity is right now. And it allows you to change your behavior so that during the summer at 4 in the afternoon when electricity prices are ridiculously high and people in Sacramento are scrambling to buy us new electricity at ridiculous rates, that you can turn off your air conditioner and say, okay, I'm just going to go swimming, or whatever, just lie down. That you can turn that down and we can turn off coal-fired power plants. I mean, Californians have done this without the meters. One summer day we turned off 17 peaking power plants, which is ridiculous. That's an incredible amount of like personally enforced compliance, but we can do this with meters, and we can reward people individually. Right now, we all buy electricity as though we're eating at a big at a buffet, and that one price fits all buffet. The thing is that at a buffet, if I eat only the good food and somebody else next to me eats all the really rotten food, they get the stomach ache and I don't. But what happens now is if I'm using energy very sparingly and my neighbor isn't, I get his stomach ache. Okay, so we're all paying, but we're also all paying the same amount, and we're not being rewarded. One of the things that we really need is smart meters to enable smart grids, which will start, and this is on to the next slide, a whole sort of a new industrial revolution in smart appliances and industries. We can have plug-in cars that feed back to the grid. We've talked about that. Solar panels and solar water heaters, which are cheaper, start to make an awful lot of sense house to house. You start to put all sorts of different kinds of renewable energy to work because you can be buying cheap Texas wind energy or cheap Mojave wind energy at night and storing it somehow and using it during the heat of the day. We have the potential to reduce the amount of energy that industry wastes profitably by about 20% and turn that into electricity. We can do that. And it just enables a whole bunch of new toasters, basically, that we'll want to buy because we'll have the power to do it. And here's the final slide. Basically, you know, the dominant political issue with energy is not so much the security, it's people's anger, and people feel that they have no control over energy prices or how much they use. They're always blaming something. You see this, they're blaming OPEC, they're blaming the Middle East, they're blaming environmentalists, they're blaming, there's just no end to the number of people that we're blaming. And part of that is that we do not have the technology or the knowledge or the ability to limit the amount of energy that we use. And this, in beginning down this path towards energy efficiency and using smart meters, allows people to have some control, and it also will stimulate the economy.
We have time for 2 quick questions, so if you have a question, please raise your hand.
Well, I was going to ask about health care, housing, energy, education, but then I decided to ask the governor about prisons and incarceration. Because one of the social contracts that I think we don't discuss here in this state is the growing and ever-growing cost of building, maintaining prisons and the prison healthcare system. So I was kind of curious as a challenge to Leaf to maybe one day on the social contract we have something about law enforcement, prisons, and incarceration, but ask how did you manage that in the state of Washington? And did you see it in your state as we begin to perceive it as a runaway process here in this state? Well,
it's a runaway process, I think, in just about every state, especially with some of the initiatives that have come about, 3 strikes and you're out and so forth. I actually voted against a version of 3 strikes and you're out in our state legislature, and then it went on to the ballot in a more draconian fashion, I thought. And now even some of the prosecutors are talking about modifying that. Be that as it may, I'm a former prosecutor, and we've had things akin to 3 strikes and you're out when we used to have what we call habitual criminal statutes, but it was to the discretion of the prosecutors to decide when they would go after someone to put them away for a long, long time. I sometimes think that a lot of the sentencing laws that we have take away too much discretion from the judges, and we're trying to make judges replace them with almost computers and these formalistic ways of sentencing people, and forgetting the human aspect and that sometimes people deserve some mercy. I think the key is looking at more prevention programs. And there's a big, strong push in our state and in other states on drug diversion programs, where if people participate in drug and alcohol treatment programs, they can avoid incarceration. If they successfully complete it after a year, then they're scot-free. I think we need to look more at community-based supervision and using empirical data to determine which people are better candidates at community supervision as opposed to just releasing everybody early. So those are some of the approaches. And you're seeing a lot of support from these diversion programs by prosecutors and judges and law enforcement instead of just this constant revolving door. While I have this opportunity, I just want to make one comment about the priorities of government approach. Priorities of government and setting priorities does not mean that you are trying to cut government. You're just trying to set priorities. And for instance, a school district can say, these are our priorities and our programs, and these are the things we most want, but we don't have enough money to pay for it. But having gone through that priorities of government approach tells you how much, therefore, you're going to seek by way of a tax increase, whether it's a city, a county, a state, or a school. But you have to have that priorities of government approach so that you know exactly what you're getting and what you really value and what you most want. Whether you're in the good times, in deficit periods, or before you even go out and ask for some sort of increased revenues.
Great, thank you. One more question up front here.
It seems to me that the most efficient way to change public and
We've got a microphone for you there, I guess.
behavior with regard to energy use is to raise the price and then to provide mechanisms for people to be able to get help to change their behavior, either by giving them a hand in buying a more efficient car, a smart meter, ways to subsidize putting energy-saving appliances in their house and so on. But the price system has been always the most efficient way for people to individually make decisions that would be in their own best interest to reduce this cost. Weather strip their house. Somebody has to have the initiative to do that and to go out and take care of that in their own situation. Why isn't that idea being used on the public scale when it's so efficient as a way of getting this kind of behavioral change?
Well, I think, Lisa, some of your work speaks to that, if you want to.
Are you saying, why don't people, when prices are high, why don't they run out and weather strip the house?
Well, at the very least.
Okay, well, prices were really low for years and years, so people they made their houses 65% larger by thousands of square feet. And when they had money, they looked at the price signals and it was low. And they said, well, I can afford a bigger car. Or they got a bigger house further from the city, and they needed a bigger car to feel more secure on that commute. And they figured, well, the gas prices aren't very high and not getting any signal. There are anthropologists at UC Davis who had people tell them, well, as a financial professional, the way for me to make money is to have a bigger car so that I can show people that I'm successful so that they'll put their money in with me. And so, I mean, this was really the thinking, and it was what seemed like a cold, rational decision to people, and it's probably what you and I did when gas was $1.50 a gallon. But what happens is as the price rises, and people were unprepared for the rise, although maybe they shouldn't have been, the pain of the energy prices came on relatively fast, and as it did, first of all, people expected the energy price to go back down, so they thought they didn't need to make improvements. And then secondly, when prices were really screaming was when they could really least afford to weather strip the house. And a lot of people actually kind of live, I wouldn't say hand to mouth, but there's a significant part of the country that's really not able to make a big investment in their house, or if they own it, or not able to make an investment in a rented house, certainly for weather stripping and things like that, even though it would make sense. And I think it's important to start thinking of those places as public infrastructure to a certain extent, because we're all drawing from the same power pool, and we're all drawing from the same carbon pool, and we're all drawing from the same power market. So if somebody is basically, heating the outside because they've got holes around their window next to me, that's as much my problem as my own problems in my house, because that's driving the overall demand and the prices up. Kind of on a global scale. And I think that also it just was not telegraphed to people. There was not a consistent message that prices were going to rise, that people were in any way deserved high energy prices. We tended to see the success of our overall foreign policy and energy policy is that the prices were low. And so everyone patted themselves on the back and bought a bigger car. People didn't get the message for a really long time.
Well, hopefully now we have some public leaders, Lisa Margonelli included, who want us to take responsibility for some of these decisions. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panel. And we have one more panel today, which will be beginning immediately.